Most people think the American military became what it is today because of its victories, but that's not entirely true. In fact, one of the most important turning points in modern American warfare didn't come from a triumph. It came from a disaster, a mission so chaotic, so humiliating, and so deadly that it forced the United States military to admit something it had never openly admitted before. We were not ready. This single failed operation changed how special forces are trained, how branches communicate, how missions are planned, and even how future wars are fought. And for decades, most Americans barely knew the full story. This is the story of Operation Eagle Claw, the Special Forces mission that went so wrong, it changed the military forever. The crisis that started it all. It began in the late 1970s, during a time when America was still recovering from Vietnam. Public trust in the government was shaky. Confidence in military leadership was fragile. And overseas, tensions were rising fast. On the 4th day of November, 1979, everything exploded. A group of Iranian revolutionaries stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran. They overwhelmed the guards, broke through the compound, and took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. Images of blindfolded Americans were broadcast around the world. For the United States, it was a nightmare playing out on live television. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Diplomacy stalled. Negotiations failed. And every night, Americans watched the news, wondering if their country still had any real power left. President Jimmy Carter was under immense pressure. The hostages had been captive for months, and the world was watching. Eventually, the decision was made. If diplomacy wouldn't bring them home, the military would. Differently, a mission, unlike anything before. The rescue plan that followed was one unprecedented. There was no single Special Operations Command at the time, no unified structure, no standard playbook for joint missions like this. Instead, the operation would rely on pieces pulled from different branches, many of which had never trained together. The mission was called Operation Eagle Claw. The goal was simple on paper. Fly into Iran undetected, move hundreds of miles inland, rescue the hostages from the embassy, extract everyone safely. In reality, it was one of the most complex military operations ever attempted. The plan involved Navy helicopters, Air Force cargo planes, Delta Force operators, Army Rangers, CIA intelligence assets, all operating in enemy territory at night, with no margin for error. Chafsund, the plan, step by step. The operation was broken into multiple phases. First, Air Force transport planes would fly from bases outside Iran and land at a remote desert location known as Desert One. At the same time, Navy helicopters would fly hundreds of miles from an aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea to that same point. Once on the ground, helicopters would refuel. Crews would rest. The force would move deeper into Iran the next night. Eventually, Delta Force would assault the embassy, free the hostages, and move everyone to a nearby airfield for extraction. Every part of the plan depended on perfect timing. And almost immediately, things began to go wrong. Nafani, trouble in the air. The helicopters launched first. 8 Navy RH-53 helicopters lifted off into the darkness, heading inland over Iran. Not long after takeoff, they encountered something no one had fully planned for. Haboobs. Massive desert dust storms. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Instruments malfunctioned. Crews became disoriented. One helicopter was forced to turn back early due to mechanical issues. Another suffered serious navigation problems. By the time the helicopters reached Desert One, only 6 remained. That number mattered. The mission required a minimum of 6 helicopters was to continue. They were already on the edge. Now, Desert One, where everything fell apart. Desert One was supposed to be quiet, empty, isolated. It wasn't. Shortly after landing, a civilian bus unexpectedly drove through the area. Then, a fuel truck appeared. Operators detained civilians on the spot, trying to keep the mission secret. Time was slipping away. Then came the final blow. One of the remaining helicopters was discovered to have a critical hydraulic failure. That left 5 operational helicopters, below the required minimum. At this moment, commanders faced an impossible decision: continue with too few aircraft, or abort the mission entirely. After tense discussions, the call was made: abort. The rescue would not happen, but even leaving safely would prove deadly. Mukden, the fatal collision. As forces prepared to withdraw, chaos erupted. In the swirling dust and darkness, one helicopter lifted off too close to a parked Air Force fuel plane. The helicopter's rotor struck the aircraft. In seconds, both vehicles exploded into flames. Fire engulfed the desert. 8 American servicemen were killed instantly. Others barely escaped with their lives. Equipment was abandoned. Aircraft were left behind, and the surviving forces evacuated in shock. The mission was over. The hostages were still in captivity, and America had just experienced one of the most humiliating military failures in its history. Martyrdom. The world watches. The failure news of the disaster spread quickly. The Iranian government paraded the wreckage on television. Burned aircraft, abandoned weapons, proof that the world's most powerful military had failed. For President Carter, the political damage was devastating. For the families of the fallen, the cost was permanent. And for the United States military, it forced a painful realization: this wasn't bad luck. This was a systemic failure. What went wrong? The hard truth investigations followed, and the findings were brutal. The military had no unified command for special operations, poor communication between branches, incompatible equipment, limited joint training, conflicting leadership structures. Each unit was elite on its own, but together they were disorganized. The failure wasn't the courage of the men on the ground. It was the system they were placed into, and this time the military couldn't ignore it. The changes that followed Operation Eagle Claw became a turning point. In the years that followed, the United States made sweeping reforms. A unified Special Operations Command was created. Joint training became mandatory. Dedicated aviation units were formed to support special forces. New doctrine emphasized coordination, redundancy, and adaptability. This directly led to the creation of modern joint task forces, improved intelligence integration, specialized aircraft like the MH-60 and MC-130. Better command authority during complex missions. The lessons written in blood at Desert One reshaped everything. From failure to precision. Years later, those changes paid off. Operations like the invasion of Panama, the rescue of Captain Phillips, the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, all relied on systems born from the ashes of Eagle Claw. The mission that failed ensured future missions would succeed. The legacy of Eagle Claw. Today, Operation Eagle Claw is studied in military academies around the world, not as a joke, not as a footnote, but as proof that even superpowers must learn or suffer again. 8 men died in the Iranian desert. Their sacrifice forced a reckoning that saved countless lives in the decades that followed. And that's the real legacy of the mission that went so wrong. It made sure America would never make the same mistake twice. Sometimes history isn't shaped by victories. Sometimes it's shaped by the moments that expose every weakness at once. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this to get more recaps.